I'm your moderator, Matt Madison with Wood. Wood is a global consulting agency supporting its customers, which include both government and private industry with engineering, program management, and construction services worldwide. Our speaker today is Matt Dean, who is president and CEO and founder of Marcon Solutions and brings over 25 years of experience to his company. Their primary focus is executive management and consulting support throughout the intelligence community and the Department of Defense. We're going to dive into a few of the successes, failures, and lessons learned that took them from their first contract to a company that is doing $50 million in revenue after just 10 years from their first contract. Marcon Solutions has also been awarded by the Washington Post as one of the best places to work every year for the past 5 years. And then just a few administrative items to go over. First, please take notes of where the exits are at the end of the rooms in case of an emergency. And then also, please silence your cell phones just so we don't have anything going on during the presentations. Thank you to all our sponsors, and as a reminder, you can receive a PDH for attending this session. So make sure your badge was scanned so that you're eligible for that PDH if that's something that is of interest to you. And then also these presentations will be available on the SAME SBC website starting next week. And as you've heard, this session is being audio recorded. So if you'd like to ask a question, please save them all for the end. Raise your hand and go to the mic. And then try and keep it brief so that we can get as many as possible. So with no further delay, let me let Matt take the floor.
Thanks, Matt. Who in the room has been camping? Sleeping bags, tents, up in the mountains, real deal camping. That's the only type of vacation I knew growing up. My dad would pick out a new state park. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, a new state park on the eastern seaboard, and take my brothers and I grew up with 3 other brothers, 1 older, Tim, 2 younger, Michael and Kevin, and we would go camping. And when I was 10 years old, he decided to get a little bit more adventurous, and he took us up to upstate New York in the Adirondacks Mountains. If you haven't been up there, it's a fantastic place to visit. We drove all day to get there, and finally arrived at the campground, and drove around the campground looking for just the best campsite. Found what we were looking for. Great spot. Great spot for our tent, great spot for our campfire, right next to the creek. And we did what we always did. We pulled out our stuff, set up our sleeping bags, set up our tent, and then went to look for sticks and logs to start burning stuff. You know, that was the entertainment. And at this point, it was starting to get dark. And up there, once the sun goes down below the mountains, it's like a light switch. Starting to go dark, and my dad says, "Boys, I'm going to walk up to the bathroom. Don't go anywhere." And then for these campgrounds, if you haven't been there to one of these, these bathhouses are centrally located across the campground, so they're a couple hundred yards or a quarter mile away. And at 5 or 10 minutes, this was 40 years ago, 5 or 10 minutes later, we hear this noise off in the woods next to the campsite. And I remember this to the day. My brothers and I looked at each other and said, Dad's just trying to scare us. And a few seconds later, it wasn't my dad. A huge bear comes walking out of the woods right at us. And what do the experts tell you? That when you encounter a bear in the woods, you're supposed to get big. You're supposed to get really big. And the reason you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to grab branches, and you're supposed to gather as a group. And the reason you do this is because you want to feel like a powerful. You want to give the bear the impression that you're this powerful opponent, and you want to gain the respect of the bear. So I suppose these experts, whoever they are, was expecting 10-year-old Matt to gather my brothers up, gather a bunch of branches, and scare this huge bear away. You think that happened? No way. Huh. So what's the other thing experts tell you here that experts tell you to do? Play dead. I tell you, play dead. But do you think we played dead? No chance. We did not play dead. So what do you think we did? We ran. And you've probably heard this expression before, and it's very true, that if you're being chased by the bear, you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun your friends. And in my case, you have to outrun your brothers. Now, fortunately for us, that we all made it back, and it was incredible. This bear grabbed our cooler in its paws, slammed it back and forth, and ate all our food. So what does this have to do with the Federal Small Business Conference or the federal industry? Well, there are a lot of bears out there, and they're huge. We've got some of the federal agencies that we work with, and again, they expect us as small businesses to be big and powerful. And there's other types of, other types of small business, or other types of bears out there. These companies that we work with. And again, they expect us to be big and powerful or appear big and powerful. They're all about risk reduction. They want us to, if they want to contract with us as small businesses, that's fine, but they'd like to have large small businesses or small businesses that appear large. Pick up the branches, make yourself big, do things that can make yourself big and powerful for these bears. And I talked to a lot of different CEOs about this general topic. And one of the things I hear from CEOs that they're hesitant to invest in their business. Or others who are ready to start businesses, they're hesitant to start small businesses. And the reason being is, and you hear this all the time, that they say that I don't have anything that differentiates me. I don't have a product or service that differentiates me. And perfect. It's great if you can have a product or service that differentiates you. But to me, that's like outrunning the bear. You don't always have to outrun the bear. This is a trillion-dollar industry. Sometimes all you need to do is outrun your friends or outrun the competitors. And so what we're going to talk about this morning is ways you can do that. Ways you can scare the bear, look bigger and more powerful even though maybe you're not, or get a little better than your competitors. And if anybody watches ESPN, they've got, they run down their top 10 plays of the day. Well, we're going to do this top 10 style. So we're going to run through from 10 going down to 1. And just like on ESPN, sometimes there's a difference of opinion on maybe what number 1 play of the day is. So I'll be curious afterwards if you guys agree with my number 1 as we go through this. Number 10, compensation strategy for key talent. Compensation, when you talk about compensation, usually it's about how much. How much are you going to pay somebody? Well, I'd rather talk in this one, I'd rather talk about how. Not how much, but how are you going to pay somebody? I assume there's some baseball fans in the room. Anybody know who this is? Bryce Harper. I'm a huge Washington Nationals fan. And by just about any definition, or by a lot of definitions, Bryce Harper is a key talent for the Washington Nationals. And the Nationals, specifically the Lerner family who owns the Nationals, are in an interesting position right now because Bryce Harper's a free agent. And he wants to get paid a lot of money. And I wish, as a fan, I wish the Lerners would call me and ask my opinion on what they should do. I haven't checked my phone yet this morning, but I don't think they're going to do that. But talk about how they're going to pay Harper. And let me give you a little bit of an example. The Washington Nationals are worth $1.6 billion. Their franchise is worth $1.6 billion. That's a lot of money. New York Yankees, $4 billion. It's like $2.5 billion more. So instead of just throwing money at Harper, current year money, maybe what if they got creative and start to tie his compensation to the value of their franchise? Hey, do the Lerners care about the value of their franchise? I think that's something they need to ask themselves. What do they really care about as CEOs of their organization? Do they care about the value of the franchise? Do they care about annual income? Do they care about winning? Tie Harper's income compensation to what's important to CEOs. So what says as has small business CEOs. What's important to us? Is it revenue? Is it profit? Is it cash flow? Is it enterprise value? And the most important thing is making sure you're clear as the owner or the CEO, what's important to you? What kind of financial metrics is important to you? And find out what's important to your key talent. And incentivize, talk to, convince, make them align their compensation strategy or their compensation to yours. So the second bullet, align incentives of key talent to your own financial goals. If I, as a CEO, care about the value of my company, then I absolutely have to align the compensation strategy of my key talent to the value of my company. If all I care about is bottom line cash at the end of the day, tie it to that. Now, not everybody needs a strategy. This is, again, you've got to pick out a minority number of people in your organization that need a strategy. It's too complicated to have a true, drawn-out, literally written-down strategy for everybody. But for your key talent, this is an important task. Another thing, accept more variable compensation. I, as the CEO of Marcon, almost all of my compensation is variable. If the company gets more successful, I make more money. If the company has less success in the year, I make less money. One of the worst things you can do as the owner or the CEO is if you make a decision that helps you in your personal compensation and hurts your key talent. You don't want to be in the situation. So you want to align those incentives to make sure that when you're making decisions, that if you're making decisions about your own personal bottom line, it also helps your key talent's bottom line. So an action for you. Look in your organization. Identify 5 or 2 or 3 or maybe just 1 and figure out what's important to them. First figure out what's important to yourself, but then go out and figure out what's important to them. Number 9, organizational chart trap. At this conference, maybe at the Society of American Military Engineers, maybe this is a dumb question, but do we have any engineers? Any engineers in the room? Yeah. 1991, Virginia Tech, proud Hokie. And what do engineers like to do when they're presented with a problem? They like to solve it. They like to pull out pencil and paper or pull out CAD, and they like to solve their problem. I call this the curse of being an engineer. So an engineer starts a company, or an engineer's at the beginning of a small business, and what do they want to do? They want to design their company. And for companies, that means an org chart. And so my advice to engineers through tough lessons learned from myself, don't do that. Don't get out your piece of paper. Don't design your company just yet. And no pun intended, literally, you will box yourself in a bad way. You don't want to do that. There's a book out there by Marshall Goldsmith, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. It's all about individual skills of the skills that got you to where you are today in your career may not be the right skills to get you to the next stage of your career. But the same lesson learned is applicable to organizations. The organizational chart you have right now, or that you can envision right now, is not the organization to take you to your final goals. So avoid creating that paper leadership, because that's what it is, a paper leadership structure at this point. It'll put you in a bad spot when you have to change. Action. So take a look at your own org chart in your company. Is it flexible enough? Does it leave room for adding additional talent as you grow? If you're a 5-person organization, does it work for a 50-person organization? Does it work for a 500-person organization? Well, the answer to this question is maybe it depends on where you want to go as a company. But if the answer is no, does it leave room for growth? Or no, it doesn't leave room for the addition of new talent. My suggestion, blow it up. Go back, have a bold initiative in your company and say, we're going to get rid of our org chart, we're going to get rid of titles. Because what you want to do at the small level in the emerging small businesses, you want everybody to be focusing on the bottom line mission. Not bottom line profit, but bottom line mission. What are we trying to accomplish as a company? Don't get them caught up in VP of disruption, VP of buzzwords, whatever title that you want to give them when you're starting out. Number 8, unique aspects of a government services provider. Marcon Solutions, the company that I work for, got started November 1st, 2007. On that day, the S&P 500 stock index was 1550. 1 year later, 12 months later, it was at 900. Stock market dropped 42%. November 1st, 2007, unemployment was at 5%. 1 year later for us, it was at 10%. When we got started, the economy was rolling. 1 year after we got started, it wasn't. And so I get asked about that at times. Well, you guys, that's just a terrible time. How did you survive and even thrive during that year? Small businesses fail all the time. The economy's bad. And I literally look at them puzzled and says, what are you talking about? That's not my economy. We're in the government economy. The government economy is unique. And hopefully you can see this in the back. This is a chart that tracks the general economy growth year over year for the past 20 years versus the government economy, government spending growth year over year. There's no correlation between these. Don't watch CNN, don't watch MSNBC to get your financial news on how you should plan your company. The government economy, the government industry is very unique, so you need to go out there and figure out all the unique parts about our industry and start to educate yourself. So I'll throw out a few things. Protests. What other industry out there where a decision maker on an opportunity or requirement says, okay, I've chosen company A, and company B says, yeah, I don't like that decision. Time out. Let's talk about it for a while. You can't do anything yet. You can't move forward. And finally, the government comes back and says, all right, I still choose company A after a long time. Company B says, I still don't like that decision. Time out again. That's our industry. If you don't know how protests can impact you, even as a small business, start to figure it out. Start to do your homework. Security clearances. A Harvard MBA might be valuable in Wall Street. Security clearances are valuable to us. If you don't know how to manage security clearances, do your homework. If it's not important to you, it's absolutely important to your employees. Figure out how you can get your employees security clearances. Figure out how you can maintain your employees security clearances. And last one I'll talk about, government shutdown and sequestration. Again, what other industry out there, trillion-dollar industry, can be shut down over a political disagreement? If that's not unique, I don't know what it is. And this is not theoretical. President Trump is talking about shutting down the government right after the midterm elections, Tuesday. So in action, something that fits your culture, but what happens if the government shuts down? What's your plan? What if it shuts down for a day? Is it a different plan if it shuts down for 10 days or 30 days? It's just you go actually write down a plan, talk about it with your management team, and figure out how to execute. It's not theoretical. Number 7, growth versus acquisition strategy. I put small businesses into 3 categories. The first one is called an acquisition company. These are companies that start out and they start to grow, they make investments, and they get better. And so over time, the horizontal axis over time, they get more successful, and then they get acquired. Certainly nothing wrong with that type of strategy. And after they get acquired, maybe they get better, maybe they stay the same, maybe they get worse. Pretty much a wild card. Next type of company I call a lifestyle company. Usually a little bit slower growth. You get to some point in level of success, and then you flatten out. The reason I call it a lifestyle company is typically usually the owner of the company decides, maybe by choice, maybe not choice, that this company is big enough, successful enough, it kicks off enough income to support my lifestyle. So I don't need to stress anymore, I don't need to put my foot on the gas anymore, I don't need to grow anymore. We're now in a lifestyle company, and we're going to flatten out. Good for that one person, maybe. Bad for a lot of other people. Third company, is a growth company. Slower investment. So you see the curve, it takes a little bit longer to get there, but higher in the end. So first thing, figure out which one you are, or which one you want to be. And you don't have to be on the same path forever, but be very clear about what, in your mind, where you want to be, and be very transparent about it. It doesn't do any good to be on the acquisition path and not tell anybody. You need to make sure that your key managers, your employees, now maybe you don't have to tell everybody, but make sure people know what your strategy is. And if people are paying attention, they're going to know anyways, because some of these decisions about investments or talent or culture or how you compensate people better be consistent with that strategy. And so if people are paying attention, they're going to know what your strategy is if you're consistent in your decision making. So in action, discuss your strategy with your CEO, with your team. Or ask your CEO, ask your boss, what is their strategy? And how can you help? Investing in indirect staff. There are all kinds of functions that are needed to run your business. We've got HR, contract, security, IT, and you have to decide how much of each, which one is first? Is HR first before accounting versus before IT? Do I need 2 IT guys and 1 HR person? These are tough decisions. The other thing you need to do is decide whether you're insourcing or outsourcing. Insourcing, you are hiring as W-2 employees. These are your company employees. Outsourcing, you're contracting out. There's not necessarily a right or wrong strategy, but my opinion, insourcing, if you're on the growth path, you should lean towards insourcing. If you're on the acquisition path, you should lean towards outsourcing. And at Marcon, we are absolutely on the growth path. We talk about it all the time. It's integrated even with our culture. That growth is part of our culture. Everybody knows that we're on the growth path. So we insource. We insource all these functions. And it's been interesting over the last year or so. We have, again, we talk about it all the time. We're very open about it. We make lots of investments in making sure that we stay on that growth path. And just like in our business, it's a slower ramp up, but we think that's got a longer return. And we now are working with, we have other companies that are asking us who are either early stage or they've got a different strategy, they want to outsource. They're coming to us and says, well, can you help us? Can we outsource some of these functions to you guys? So it's been an interesting ride for us over the last year. So an action for you. Create a list of corporate functions. Maybe it's these, you can use these. Maybe you have a few others. Maybe there's tax on there, maybe there's legal on your list. And write down whether you would insource or outsource. But the important part is force yourself to write down why. Why would you insource or why would you outsource? Is it your strategy? Is it something else? Is it related to your culture? Is it your timing? Is it, hey, I can't do it for the first year, then after the next year I'm going to change. But write down your rationale. Several years ago, I was in a meeting, and this guy kept on saying, OPM, OPE. OPM, OPE. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, other people's money, other people's expertise. And what he meant by that is, no matter, even if you do have a lot of money, or even if you are the smartest person in the world, doesn't mean you can't take advantage of other people's money and take advantage of other people's expertise. And one of the tough lessons learned I had to make in the last 11 years is that managing a corporate balance sheet or corporate finances is much different than managing your personal stuff. Usually in the personal side, you don't have an income statement and a balance sheet. Maybe some financial geeks do. I never had a balance sheet at home. But a balance sheet, one of my suggestions related, and this could be one of these scare the bear types of things. Once you have some success, multiple periods of success, whether that's multiple quarters or maybe multiple years, get yourself as big of a line of credit as you can. Maybe it costs you a couple $1,000s in fees at the bank. Go talk to a bank, go talk to a couple banks. Get yourself a big line of credit. Wait till you have a couple good years behind you, or a couple good quarters behind you. But take advantage of that success and go get a line of credit. I have something, when to ignore experts. I've got this theory or belief that, in general, experts will give you middle-of-the-road advice. And the reason is they do a lot of research, and they say, well, we're going to give you best practices advice. And usually best practices is the average of what everybody in the industry is doing. And so that's middle of the road. Sometimes, if you want to outrun the competition, if you want to be a little different, you need to ignore the experts and go out on your own. And usually when you decide to go out on your own, it's because you're much more knowledgeable about your culture or more knowledgeable about your strategy than those experts are. So sometimes ignore the experts. Another action. Take maybe that same list of corporate functions and write down one person that you would call for advice. Who would you call if you had an issue with IT? Or who would you call if you had an issue with HR? Now, maybe you can't complete that list right now, but make it a to-do item for you, your personal development over the next year. Complete that list. CEO sounding board. Usually, employees go to other employees or more senior employees. Those senior employees go to managers when they have issues and they need to talk about a career issue or they need to vent. Those managers sometimes go to the CEO to vent or to complain about somebody else or say things aren't working or say I'm not happy. Where does the CEO go to? CEO needs to go someplace. You need to be able to vent. So don't forget about yourself. Usually you'll delegate down and say, hey, you need to develop yourself as a professional. You need to go get training. This is the advice as CEOs we give to our teams. Turn it around on yourself. CEO mentoring, CEO professional development. So there's a lot of groups out there who can help. There's a lot of peer advisory type groups. I'm a fan of these peer advisory groups, and they're out there. There's the one that I've been involved with for years and years and years is called Vistage, but there's a lot of them. And afterwards, I'm glad to talk to you about my experience with these peer advisory groups and how they've helped me. Understanding your company costs. This is one of my favorites, and I certainly could have had this as number one. And so I want to take you through an example, and you may have heard the expression about how to lie with statistics, and there's books written about it. There's one up here. I want to talk about how to lie about your corporate profit. And I'm going to walk through an example that demonstrates this. And so your customer comes to you and says, I need 2 people for this requirement. Can you give me an hourly rate for 2 of your staff to help me out in my organization? So say, I know how to price this. And they're asking for a junior resource, and in my example, I've got a $50,000 salary, and a senior resource with a $150,000 salary. And so your customer says, I need one of each. So you take those salaries and you add fringe. Fringe is the cost of payroll taxes, the cost of vacation, the cost of sick leave, cost of holidays, and DCA, talks about the way DCA asks us as in the industry to build it up is you start tacking on these percentages. So in my example, the fringe percentage rate is 50%. So the cost of salary plus fringe for my junior resource is 75, and I've got $225,000 for my senior resource. So now the next step in pricing is you add overhead and G&A. Overhead and G&A is the cost of your business development team, the cost of management, the cost of rent, the cost of the chairs that you're sitting in. And again, we develop a percentage off of that, and a relatively industry normal percentage for those types of functions is 20%. So I tack on 20%. And now the total cost of my junior resource is $90K. Total cost of my senior resource is $270K. Fantastic. Now the customer asked me for an hourly rate, so I'm going to divide by number of hours per year. That's how much it's costing me per hour. I want to make money, right? So we need to tack on profit to these costs. So now these are the rates I'm going to tell my customer. $53 an hour for my junior resource, $159 an hour for my senior resource. Fantastic. I go back to my desk or I go back to my boss and say, fantastic, we're going to make 9% on this opportunity. We're in business. Everything is great. We're happy with 9%. Well, remember, this is about how to lie about statistics or how to lie about your corporate profit. That's the one I want to point out. Using a percentage is the easy way, but it's not the accurate way. And it's interesting. It's not just the easy way or not the accurate way. It is the way in the industry. This is how our industry wants us to price these. This is how DCA wants us to price these. But it's absolutely not accurate. The cost of your chairs, the cost of your business development team, that doesn't vary based on how much you pay someone's salary. Those costs aren't dependent on salary. Those are based on headcount. Your junior resource, the chair that they sit in, costs the same amount as the chair that your senior resource sits in. When your BD person talks to your junior resource, they don't get paid less versus when they talk to your senior resource. So instead of that 20%, figure out, well, how much does it cost per person? So if I'm using $30K per person instead of that 20%, my total starts to change. Now I realize my junior person costs me $105K, my senior is $255. My cost per hour is updated. And remember, that's what we told our customer. We already bid that to our customer. Minus 6% for that junior resource, 14% for the senior resource. And maybe say, oh, that's no big deal. They average out, right? Maybe. But hope's not a good strategy, right? What if your customer comes back and says, yeah, thank you so much for the information. I really like your team, but your senior resource is a little bit too expensive. I think I'm going to fill that in-house. I'm going to have my GS14 fill that position, but I love your junior resource. And you're like, well, 9%, fantastic. No, you're losing money. You're not making 9%. You're losing money on that junior resource. Don't fool yourself. Not what you thought. So it's critically important to figure out what the drivers of your costs are. What's the driver of the cost of your chair? What's the driver of the cost of your BD person? It's not salary. So in action, go back to middle school math. Pull out a pencil and paper. Don't rely on these large systems that are designed for large companies to give you the right answer. Force yourself to go through the calculations by hand, not even a calculator, literally get out pencil and paper, go through it by hand. Your brain starts to work a little differently when you do it by hand. And you'll start to see that the drivers say, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. I want to think about how to do this differently. Now, DCAA, I talked before about we need to operate like bigger companies. DCAA has a pattern or a system, the way they want companies to operate. You still can calculate that overhead and G&A rate of 20%. My suggestion is change the fee on your small guy. Change the fee on your lower price person. Don't think that the same fee is going to get you the same result. Number 2, developing company culture. There's a lot of definitions out there about company culture. This is the one I like. The set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterize an organization. And these are some of the things about my organization. I mentioned before that we're a growth organization. That is absolutely part of our culture. We've got, in the bottom there, we've got a chart that represents growth. We've got other things. We've got community events. We've got outings. We've got that one in the middle is a recognition gong, part of our culture. And I would say that this is your number one job. The CEO's number one job is to develop company culture. And make sure it's a reflection of your personality. If you're all about bottom line, make your company all about bottom line. If you're all about community events, incorporate that into your culture. If you're all about being healthy and environmentally friendly, make that part of your culture. But be authentic. You're not going to fool your team. If it's not in you, then it's not going to work for your team. And I've said that before, and people said, well, what if my CEO is a jerk? I would rather you develop your company culture around your CEO who's a jerk than try to fool people. You're going to get better results that way. So the action. Develop a culture-related ritual. And I missed that bullet, the cultural rituals. And I'll give you a couple examples of cultural rituals. I mentioned the gong in the middle there. Every Thursday at 2 o'clock, our company does a mini recognition ceremony in the office. It's part of our culture. Every new employee who starts with us at Marcon, I meet with and go through our core values, go through our strategy. That's part of that's a corporate ritual for us, part of our culture. So figure out what works for you. And don't delegate this. This is CEO's number one job. This is not something to delegate. And number one, ambitious goals. And for this one, I want to give a couple examples. Harley-Davidson, an iconic American brand that in 2009, Harley-Davidson was struggling. And what they were doing, they were losing market share to overseas competitors. And they weren't sure exactly why. So they dug into it and figured out what they determined was the key metric for losing market share was the time between the order and time of delivery was 180 days. It was way too long. And that just wasn't working in today's market. So they gathered all the supply chain guys together. They gathered manufacturing engineers in a room. They said, this is not going to work. And they thought, we need an ambitious goal. 180 days is too long. We got to get that down to 72. And the engineers who like to solve problems, they immediately jumped in and says, we can take these processes and put them in parallel instead of serial. We can eliminate this duplication of effort. We can probably get it down to 72 days. And they said, no, you're not understanding. Not 72 days, 72 hours. We got to get down to 72 hours. And I wasn't in the room during this meeting. It's been documented. But I would imagine there was an awkward silence. I would imagine there was probably a lot of choice words. There was a lot of, you don't know what the heck you're talking about. How can you say that? And then they went off and said, no, this is the direction we're going. We're going to go solve this problem. I don't know if Harley-Davidson ever got down to 72 hours. But today, they're about 3 weeks. Time of order to time of delivery is about 3 weeks. Their market share has rebounded. Their quality is better than ever. Something really interesting that happened to them as they broke down this process and started over. They said, hey, if we're going to get down to 72 hours, we've got to start completely over with a blank sheet of paper. And something interesting has happened about their quality, because you would think that quality would be a problem. We'd lose our quality. Their quality is so good now, they've got a different problem. People aren't buying new motorcycles anymore. They're buying used motorcycles. And that's creating a business problem for them. I'll give you a Marcon example. In Marcon, we had been closing our financial month between 25 and 28 days after the month ended. By the time we got all our information together and produced our reports and got people to approve them and got invoices created, invoices approved, and invoices submitted to our customers, 25 to 28 days. And we tried to incrementally improve that and didn't get very far. So finally, about a year ago, I said, no, we're doing something different. We're going down to 5 days. 28 days is not good enough. We're going down to 5 days. And after awkward silence and a few choice words and a lot of, you don't know what you're talking about, you don't know how this process works, we started working on the problem. And it's been a year. We have not closed within 5 days. We've closed within 6. We routinely close within 7 days. Our team has come together. We now understand all the players in the process, how everybody in the company impacts the process. So our quality has gone up. And so the reason for these stories is it's so much easier or so much better to provide momentum and talk about the idea that missing a goal is not necessarily failure if it's an ambitious goal. In my example with the 28 days, if we had a goal of 20 days instead of 5 days, and we crushed it. We got down to 15 days. Is that better than missing our ambitious goal of 5 days by closing in 7 days? No, I'd much rather miss an ambitious goal by a little bit than crush an easy goal. So instead of leaving with an action for number one, I want to leave you with a quote. The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are usually the ones who do. First, I'll give it a shot. Does anybody know who said this? I know
Jobs used it in a commercial, but I don't know.
Steve Jobs. He was pretty ambitious. So before questions, I want to leave a few key takeaways. One, don't be afraid of the bear. Go figure out how to scare the bear. Go figure out how to improve your company. Go fire your accountant. Or at least go pull, again, please, pull the math out. Pull the piece of paper out and do the math yourself. These big systems that your accountants or others use, they produce fine data, but they start to mask what drives the data. You don't understand what's in that data. Pick a corporate strategy and talk about it with your team. Hopefully you saw how so many of these other items were driven by your strategy. Everything has to be consistent with your strategy. So pick which one you're on. It doesn't have to be a lifetime decision. Pick where you are right now and start planning around it. And finally, go start a company. It's a lot of fun. So I'll take questions. If you guys have, if you can't get questions answered, if we have questions today, I'd love to stay around as long as Matt will allow us. If not, we have a booth with one of our great partners, Concourse Federal, down in booth 123. I'll be down here afterwards, and would love to talk to you about specifics with your company, or if something today resonated, or if you have a disagreement on what number one is. I'd love to hear about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And your action items were great. That was great how you went into the 10 different steps and the action items for each.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions they'd like to? There's a mic if you want to.
I just wanted to ask, you said with the org chart, one thing you thought about was doing away with the org chart. If I understood you correctly. So what's your alternative instead of that?
Well, I say...
So real quick, just to repeat the question, doing away with the org chart, what is the alternate to that, just for the recording?
And just to be clear, I'm recommending that for smaller businesses. As your business gets bigger, and that's a subjective get bigger, certainly org charts are valuable. But for smaller businesses, I say there's no alternative. I mean, focus on the bottom line, focus on submitting your customer. Make sure for small businesses, everybody's got to wear so many hats. Don't, through a design of your org chart, don't box people into, hey, this is my hat, that's all I have to worry about. The small business, they have to worry about the entire success metric. You'll have plenty of time for your org chart to develop over time.
One thing I didn't hear you talk about, I'd be interested, is patience and how long it takes you to get there.
So the question is, talking about patience and how long it takes you to get to where you're at.
It's certainly, the cop-out answer is it depends. It's variable. But to me, it's driven back by that strategy. That if you saw that my 3 lines, the growth line was you have to be the most patient, because in my mind that's going to require the most investment. Those investments are going to take time to have a return on that investment. So it depends on your strategy. If it's a growth strategy, you need to be prepared to have a long term and therefore be patient. If you're not patient, says, hey, I want to have, I'm whether retiring or I'm getting a different business, I'm doing something 3 years from now, I would suggest go the acquisition route. And it's going to be more risky. You're probably going to have to outsource things. You may not be able to develop a great corporate culture, long-term corporate culture, but if that's your strategy, then go the acquisition route. Yes.
So I'm really curious about this rate structure exercise that you just did,
Yeah.
because that's certainly not the way it's been portrayed in our company. There's a lot of sturm and drang about our rates are too high, nobody's hiring us because we're too expensive, and yet some middle range between paying people what they deserve to be paid and, compensating them, and that has to come out in their billing rate.
Yeah.
So how, can you distill, and I know you're trying to record this, so.
You can speak into the mic if you have a longer question.
Can you just go a little bit deeper into how it's better for your company's bottom line to use higher rates than lower rates?
This is, the finances is one of the things you really can't skirt around. If you are paying people more, if you're in the market where your talent requires more compensation, the cost of that has to go someplace. Now, some of the things that you can decide to do as a company owner, you can defer some of that compensation. We talked about variable compensation. So therefore, you could ask some of your key employees to say, hey, well, instead of me paying you $100,000 now, how about I pay you $75,000 now and $40,000 in 3 years when we hit our metric? Some of that, or based on that variable compensation, and therefore you're going to only incur that $40,000 cost when you have more success. And the reason growth is such a powerful strategy is because growth solves a lot of these problems. Because the idea that we talked about, that $30,000 per person, which is such a big driver, every amount of growth, you start to tick that number down. Because it's not dependent on salary. The goal should be, hey, it's $30,000 per person this year. I want to get that down to $28,000 per person next year. And that's either growth helps that because you get to spread those fixed costs across more people, or process improvement. You can start to get costs out of the system. But I don't have a great answer for you. There's not a shortcut. Costs and the problem and why that to me is so powerful. I see it a lot of times is executives try to make a shortcut and they try to ignore costs. They try to put costs over here. Says I'm going to reduce my rates. And that example I gave of the 40K, they may just take that 40K and put it off to the side and not count it in their rates. That's just a disaster. The costs are coming. The costs, you have to count for all your costs. You have to understand where all your costs are going.
Going to bring the mic to you.
Thank you. Item number 6, investing in indirect staff for growth, in-source, for acquisition, outsource. What's the core rationale or strategy behind that?
About which way to go?
Not whether or not I'm strategically
the align
growing
them.
or acquisition, but you said if you have a growth strategy,
Yep.
you would recommend insourcing indirect as opposed to outsourcing if you're doing acquisition, and I'm asking for the strategy behind that, the rationale behind that.
Perfect, yeah. To me, it's all about culture. That if a growth strategy is, and you saw it takes a longer time to develop, and the idea of building, so therefore, in my opinion, you need a stronger culture to handle that length of time, and you want those people as employees. You want them part of your company. To me, there's a difference, and you can have contractors sit with you, you can have a contractor spend a lot of time with you. It's just not the same if they're not an employee. It's part of your culture. To me, the culture is so powerful that you can develop a better culture if they're employees. And that's going to help your growth strategy.
Anyone else? All right, well, thank you everyone for attending. And as he said, they have a booth, so if you want to stop by with any further questions or to debate the number one, feel free to stop by. Thank you.